Okay, so recently a friend had been calling me for several days on end, like messaging, calling, planning to meet up. And for one reason or the other, हम मिल नहीं पा रहे थे, mostly because I had a lot of work and मैं उस मीटिंग को टाले जा रही थी. एक पॉइंट के बाद I started feeling guilty because उसने इतना इनिशिएटिव ले लिया था and she'd been calling multiple times, you know. तो finally हमने डेट सेट किया. जिस दिन मिलना था उस दिन भी I was absolutely in no mood because पूरे week के through काम से I was completely exhausted. I needed a rest day. But commitment कर दी थी तो I went ahead and I met this friend of mine. By the time that I came back, I was completely drained of energy. इतना कि अगला दिन मुझको off लेना पड़ा from any work whatsoever so that I could carry on working for the rest of the week. Now this is a classic example of how I failed to set a boundary. तो जो ये example मैंने अभी आपको बताया ये मेरे साथ बहुत बार हो चुका है. Like this has happened multiple times when people have coaxed me into meeting or prodded me into doing something which I did not want to do. अंदर से मेरा मन नहीं था करने का, but I did it because somebody else was putting this much pressure on me. And देखने वाले को शायद ना लगे कि ये बहुत सारा प्रेशर था, but mentally it was a lot of pressure for me. And I'm very very sure that आपकी लाइफ में भी ऐसी कोई ना कोई सिचुएशन जरूर होगी जिसमें फ्रेंड ने, फैमिली मेंबर ने आपको प्रॉड किया, पुश किया, कोक्स किया और आपने गिव इन करके वो चीज कर ली जो उनको करनी थी, इवन दो आपका मन नहीं था करने का. दिस इज एन एग्जाम्पल ऑफ हाउ यू आर नॉट सेटिंग a boundary. To understand what we are doing wrong here, we first need to understand कि boundary होती क्या exactly, right? What is a boundary? A boundary is essentially a limit that you set on what you will and will not tolerate. It can be both ways, right? कि ये चीज मैं नहीं करूँगा no matter what. This makes me uncomfortable or this does not make me feel good or it makes me feel bad. It's bad for my mental health, and you set a limit on that. Similarly, you also set a limit on what you can tolerate. किस extent तक आप जा सकते हो किसी भी situation, इंसान, चीज को tolerate करने के लिए. Setting a boundary is not like creating a border between you and a toxic person. It can be if you want it to be that. Think of boundaries as creating a protective circle around yourself that you draw to prevent yourself from overdoing things for others, from overextending yourself and then burning out emotionally in the process. It's a way of protecting your mental health. Now, Indian context में setting boundaries is super complicated because we are a collectivism based society, which means that हम सब चीजें community में करते हैं. There's a lot of pressure around conforming to societal standards. Unlike the West, where it is an individualistic society, जहाँ पे individual का बहुत महत्व है. Now, let's go ahead and figure out how to actually set your boundaries. Step 1 is to become aware of what your boundaries are. जैसा कि मैंने पहले बोला था, it requires both inner work and outer work, right? हमको internally भी समझने की बहुत ज़रूरत है कि हमारी boundaries कहाँ lie करती है. What are the things that you are okay with doing? What are the things that you're not okay with doing? What are the places where you can push a little? What are the places where you can't push at all? So whenever somebody asks you to do something, whenever somebody is pushing you to do something, whenever somebody is entering your personal space and that thing is making you feel uncomfortable, you have to notice it. You have to learn to start noticing it. अच्छा ये चीज मुझे discomfort cause करी है. For instance, अगर आप घर में बैठ के काम कर रहे हो and you want to close your door because you know there's disturbance, there's noise outside, a lot of XYZ things are happening, and you close your door and that makes you feel empowered because you now have your own space, but it also makes you feel slightly guilty, slightly shameful कि अरे यार अब you know घर वाले आके बोलेंगे कि दरवाजा क्यों बंद कर दिया. That is a good example of understanding. Oh, when they enter and they say कि दरवाजा क्यों बंद कर दिया, that feeling is making you feel uncomfortable. Whereas having your own personal space, closing your door is actually making you feel empowered. So that is how you understand that this is where I want to set a boundary. The third thing is to learn to become comfortable with making other people uncomfortable. ये quote अगर आपने boundaries के बारे में थोड़ा सा भी सुना है, you must have heard that people who become uncomfortable when you draw a boundary are the ones who didn't respect it in the first place, and which is very very true. And the problem is that in Indian families, in Indian friend setups, this is everybody. So a lot of people ask me, how can you actually set a boundary, or how can you tell somebody no, or how can you say that you need space without offending the other person or without making them feel uncomfortable? The truth is, you can't. If you have been doing it for this long and now suddenly you decide that you can't do it anymore, and when you bring it up, it is going to make them feel uncomfortable. In the process, it's going to make you feel uncomfortable as well. And it is going to bring up feelings of shame and guilt and all of those, you know, negative connotations, because हम ऐसे brought up हुए हैं, like we've been brought up in such a way where boundaries का concept नहीं exist करता था. But temporary discomfort in the moment is much better than extended mental discomfort over a period of time. And that is a very, very important distinction for you to make when you go out to set boundaries. The next step is starting to say no more often. It's often easier for us to figure out कि हमें क्या नहीं करना है as opposed to हमें क्या करना है, right? So whenever something comes up and you don't want to do it, you need to start practicing saying no. ठीक है, वो आप मीक होके कह सकते हो, वो आप stubbornly कह सकते हो, वो आप टेक्स्ट में कह सकते हो, right? There are multiple ways of saying no. You can say it through body language, you can say it verbally, you can make an explanation out of it and say it, but it is important to get that into practice. जितना आप चीज़ों को ना बोलना start करेंगे, like the more you practice it, the easier it becomes to say over time. Then it becomes just as easier to set better boundaries. It becomes just as easier to say no to things you really don't want to do. The next thing that you need to do is have a contingency plan. Invariably, जब आप किसी को ना बोलोगे, invariably when you say no or you refuse to do something that you had earlier been doing, invariably when you set a boundary about certain actions in the house, let's say you go ahead and tell your mother-in-law that you don't want to have kids right now. Okay, one example. It is going to create tensions in the family. In dysfunctional families, this can look like arguments हो रहे हैं, एक दूसरे को सुनाया जा रहा है, you know, backbiting हो रही है, backbitching हो रही है. All of these things are happening. So to deal with this, now you have set a boundary in place. You need a contingency plan to get through this confrontation wala phase, right? A contingency plan basically is something that allows you to calm yourself down and not get riled up while things are being processed, while other people are processing what you are trying to say. So calming techniques, breathing techniques, journaling, going out with a friend, stepping out for some time out of the house so that things cool down once you come back and have the discussion again. So all of these are part of what you can call a contingency plan. Okay, so the next thing that you want to do is stand your ground, be firm, but don't necessarily be aggressive. What this means is कि जब आप एक boundary set करते हो, for instance, let's say you have moved into a new house with your partner who you recently married, and now your in-laws are pushing you to throw a party for the entire relatives ka family to show off the house, to show yourselves, you know, how well you're doing all of that. And you don't want to do it, right? And you tell her that, you know, it's our decision. We'll see when you want to throw a party, let us settle down, blah, blah, blah. You've drawn that boundary. ठीक है, आपने बोला है कि देखते हैं अभी करेंगे या नहीं करेंगे, अभी तो settle भी नहीं हुए हैं. You know, that kind of conversation you've had. But they keep on pushing, they keep on prodding, and they say things like, इतना तो तुमसे बोला है, तुम तो अलग जाके भी रह रहे हो और बच्चों की बात हम हमेशा मानते हैं, इतना सा नहीं कर सकते तुम हमारे लिए. Like the conversation goes on that tangent. Now you have two options. One, you can fight with them right there and then and say कि नहीं करेंगे हम, आपको समझ नहीं आ रहा है और you know मेरा घर है, मेरे rules हैं, जो मैं करना चाहूँगी वही करूँगी. Or the other option is that you can tackle the conversation more skillfully in a way that they don't get offended further. And you reassure them of your love for them while still standing firm on your ground that you don't want to have a party. In conversations where you're standing firm on your boundary, you need to work at it very, very skillfully because it's a long game. एक बार में set नहीं होंगी, एक बार में समझ भी नहीं आएगा. So you need to continue to have these conversations where you keep pushing that boundary slowly, where you are now having complete autonomy to do what you want to do. And the final thing that you really want to do is to work with a compromise in mind. Now, in Indian families, it's very important to understand that when you don't have any prior concept of boundaries, when you have no prior concept of saying no to your parents or to your family members or to relatives, when you suddenly start doing those things, it is going to rile everybody up, right? So you want to actually ease those people into what you want to do so that over a period of time, it is a long game, no doubt about it. Over a period of time, they become okay with you having more autonomy. Like they become mentally okay themselves with you having more autonomy. Now, how you do that is, to give you an example, let's say that you want to close your bedroom door when you are in your house, right? But that's a huge problem with your mom. And she's like कि दरवाजा बंद नहीं रख सकते. And again, like पूरा आसमान सर पे उठा लिया. जो आपने सबसे पहले जो बाउंड्री सेट करी वो ये है कि मुझे दरवाजा बंद करना है. उस पे लड़ाई हो गई and you guys are like कि नहीं दरवाजा बंद नहीं हो सकता. Now you give her a compromise where you're like, okay, between 2 p.m. to 5 p.m. when I'm working or when I have meetings, I want the door to be closed, and the rest of the time it's open. So this is a negotiable boundary that you are setting with her to ease her into this process of, giving you more autonomy. Why this is important is because, again, like they don't have any concept of boundaries prior to this. तो अब जब suddenly एकदम बहुत extreme boundary लगा दोगे, it can actually mess with your relationship, whether it's with your parents, friends, family members, anybody. And that is not what we want to do. We actually want to maintain that relationship while also having more autonomy in the space. And that is how you ease them into it. Actually, tell me how your experience of setting boundaries has been, with your family, with your friends. Have you been able to set them? Are you still in that space where guilt and shame are paramount? Because we want to help each other. We want to understand how individuals work. What I have given you is like a broad framework. इसको आपको बहुत individualize करके implement करना होगा, right? So these are the steps that I have given you, but the nuance of it, कि इसको कैसे exactly अपने situation में implement करना है, that is something that you have to see and that you have to tread carefully, because relationships are important. We live in a collectivistic society, so we can't shun society completely, but at the same time, we can take these steps to build more autonomy. With that, thank you so much for watching. Don't forget to share this video with somebody who will find it helpful. My aim is to help as many people as I can with these Self-Care Sunday videos. And don't forget to check out the last video in the series, and I will see you next Sunday with another Self-Care Sunday video. Have a wonderful rest of the week. Bye.